Let's start with top water first, okay? So you've got the frog that you know is typically going to be used in grass or near grassy cover, okay? And it's that uh, it's that retrieve that is more of a jerking, okay? Jerk and pause, jerk and pause. That's why you use that one. So the frog, there's also a popping frog variety that's really good. So it sort of emulates the frog, but with a popper type of face on it. The popper, uh, super effective bait on top, especially early and late. Uh, you're gonna fish it the same way. You could you can pop it so that it's spraying water as it comes in, then maybe crank it a little bit, pause it, and then pop it again back to the boat. But a really great bait. The other top water, of course, is this variation on the whopper plopper. And as you retrieve it, you're going to get this action. These float, of course, just like the popper and the frog, uh, which makes them great because you're not having to worry about getting hung up in cover and that sort of thing. But you've got to retrieve it on a steady retrieve so that you're getting that popping. If you're not getting the popping, the bait's not working. Excuse me, this plopping, as they call it. Retrieve it so that you're getting that. Okay. Another top water that you've got in here is this buzz toad. The buzz toad is going to act like the frog insofar as shape and size and the fact that it floats. It's rigged with a weighted hook. This has a little auger screw-in device on the front, so that when you put it on, the first thing you're going to do is twist this into the nose and then hook it underneath. I'll put an additional one in here. Okay. It doesn't have to be weighted, but if you're going to get some distance on it with a bait caster, then you want that. With the spinning tackle, probably okay either way. But this is a steady retrieve too. Now it's going to emulate what these other topwaters do, but it's weedless in this configuration. So what you can do is you can bring it across on a steady retrieve, but then pause it, because when these appendages are flapping, it's going to give you a lot of the same action as this buzz bait, because it's going to be stirring up a lot of water on top. Does that make sense? Okay. So those are essentially the top waters, with the exception of this, which is a sort of a hybrid. So it's a hybrid between a top water, because it does float. This is a wake bait, and it's distinguished from
Did you say wake?
wake because it makes a wake in the water. But it's distinguished from a crankbait in that this bill is almost perpendicular, okay, versus something that has an angle to it. Okay, so this dives, this doesn't, other than maybe, I don't know, 6 inches under the water. So it's gonna run right at and right under the water surface, depending upon your retrieve speed. But the beauty of it is that these don't get fished a lot. The fish don't see them as much as some of these other baits, but it's got a great action to it, and it's near the surface, but not actually on the surface most of the time. So I consider it more of a top water, but at the same time, it has that crankbait action. Another one that is sort of that. Now, this is a jerk bait. The jerk bait can come in different variations. This one, I believe, floats, but it's going to run subsurface because of this bill. when you first get these, the tendency is to fish them like you would one of these others on a steady retrieve, but you don't want to do that. It doesn't mean you can't ever do it, but if you start it that way, you're going to pause it, and then you'll take your rod and jerk it. And you're going to jerk it in such a fashion so that it's sort of a cadence. So it's going to be something not unlike where you're hitting it 2 or 3 times, pretty hard, okay? And then maybe you pause, maybe jerk it once, maybe retrieve it a little bit, and then continue that jerking. And so what it's doing is it's acting a lot like a dying shad. So as it tries like it would swim, and then it may sort of float on that pause. But then when you jerk it again, that can get a reaction bite because the fish immediately starts to go after it. So very effective, especially this time of year. And you got crankbaits. This is a square bill. It runs probably about 2 feet down. It's not going to be. These are all fairly shallow baits. I've designed it that way for you. But it'll run about 2 feet down. Of course, it's got the standard wobble, but also it's got a fairly large bead in it for sound. And of course, this blueback is pretty good in clear water too. So I think that's mostly what you have. This is a glide bait. It will sink. It's not a topwater. But typically when guys are fishing these, they're fishing them in such a way that they're reeling it also in a cadence, but it's a reel, stop, reel, stop, reel, stop. And the reason they do that is because when you fish it that way, it'll cause the bait to run from side to side like this every time you hit that reel. If you retrieve it just on a straight retrieve, it'll just sort of give a little action back to the water, not a lot, or to the boat, not a lot. Spinnerbaits sink, but they give a lot of action in the water through these blades. This is a willow leaf blade, so when it's retrieving, this flash causes it to look like shad in the water. All right. Some guys will use a trailer hook on these. I didn't mess with that, but because a lot of times the fish will short strike it. But most of the time, if you're just doing a steady retrieve, you're fine. Now, every once in a while, what you want to do with these is on a steady retrieve, but then pump it. So in other words, you'll take your rod, you've got a steady retrieve going, and then maybe you hit it a couple of times and keep it coming. Hit it. And that creates interest. Most bait fish and that sort of thing do not just go on a straight line someplace. They vary that. So that emulates the way a bait fish would work. Also have a smaller one, which is especially important when the water gets colder or when the bait fish are smaller. So you want to use a smaller one instead of the larger one. The flat-sided crankbait sinks, but it's got that same wobble, but it doesn't have the bill, so it has a lot of interest, particularly this time of year in winter. Late fall and winter is when flat-sideds are usually fished with proficiency.
And how deep will that one go?
This will go as deep as you let it go, but if you're reeling it, then it'll suspend through the water column. And one of the reasons these are so good this time of year is because the fish are not on the bottom typically. They're suspended somewhere in the column. So in order to catch those fish, you're gonna need something that will run at depth that you can regulate by your speed, so that you're fishing through that, okay, with something like this or this, which will fall into that depth. Even these, I mean, you can let those fall through the bait fish column if you're in a lake, and fish it that way. A lot of guys are doing that this time of year too. And there are a lot of other baits that are that way, but typically it looks like you're going to be shallow, so that's what this box is designed to do for the most part, with the exception of this and maybe the swim bait. Chatterbait has become a real effective bait because guys are using it now, using it a lot, and it's real good around grass, like grass edges, and that sort of thing. It will sink, but at the same time, it's like the spinnerbait in that it's to be worked through the water column, depending upon the speed you use, and also pumped from time to time. I've even seen guys use, and I have used a trailer on them, you know, not unlike that, right? But typically something that's more of a swim bait type. Something not unlike the small paddle tail on it, okay? So chatterbait, pick that one up. Soft swim baits, this one can be used just straight, or put the underspin on it. These are very effective because of this spin blade, but it's a weighted head with a hook, and so instead of using something like the offset hook, you can use one of these. Also, this is there's another kind you can buy where it's a weighted hook and a underspin blade on it, but it's sort of like the same situation as this, but with the blade, okay? And the blade makes all the difference because it flashes and gets their attention, all right? And draws them to what should look like forage or like a shad in the water, okay? So.
And how are you pulling those?
Just on a straight retrieve, maybe a jerk every once in a while, not unlike spinnerbait or even the chatterbait. These smaller swim baits can be fished. Again, I'm giving you two sizes because one is, you know, when the shad spawn or whatever is small, and it's better to use this. Colder water usually downsize your baits. So this is a smaller bait. These can be fished a couple of different ways. They could be fished on a straight retrieve, or like we talked about with the other swim baits, or they can be fished on a kind of pumping action where you're really letting them, because they sink, you can let it sink to the bottom so that it's sort of nose down, and then pull it through the water along the bottom. So you fish it not unlike a plastic worm, where you're hitting it and letting it sort of swim to the next location, okay? As if it's feeding along the bottom or something like that. Buzzbait, highly effective bait. You're going to fish it on a steady retrieve quickly in the water column. As soon as it hits, you're going to be reeling, okay? So when this bait hits the water surface, you're cranking it. And the reason you are is so that you can immediately get this blade going. This thing needs to be spinning in order for this to be an effective bait. So you're going to have to hit it, but this blade will pull them from pretty far away or from down below. Very effective bait. It can be fished all year round.
When you say pretty far away, how pulling fish from 10 feet away?
Yeah, it can pull them from 10 feet off the bottom or whatever, just like just like this one can. There's something about that blade or popping or plopping, as it were, that just gets their attention. I watched a video one time of a fish, and a guy was fishing a whopper plopper, and the fish was pointed this way. When it came by, he looked at it, and then he let it go by. And as soon as he did, he immediately turned and took the bait here, 5 feet away. He just couldn't stand it anymore. It was amazing to watch. So now, finesse baits are these plastics. We talked a little bit about Texas rig. I'll show you a Texas rig. But I put actually different kinds of terminal tackle in here. Okay.
And what do you mean by terminal tackle?
Terminal tackle is what you're going to use for hook, and you're going to use some kind of weight, unless you're using it weightless. This is a bullet slip sinker. Okay. This is a 3/0 extra wide gap or EWG hook. It fits. I'll just use one of these. It fits into the worm like this. You come into the shank, or not the shank, but in the crook, bring it through, and then twist it. Okay. I've gone too far. All right, you want this to be coming out a little more up here. But just for conjecture's sake, you're going to come down and see where it hits this crook. That's where you're going to come into it. Like that. Now, if I'd done this correct up here, this would be straight. Get you another couple of worms. At any rate, you see the idea. The idea is to come in, okay, that makes sense. So you're getting it as straight as you can. And a good way to hook it, another way to hook it, is so that you're not necessarily in the middle like this, but really more on the side, so that it's more skin hooked to the side. That way, when you set the hook on the fish, it's popping out easier. Okay, and so that's what's going to happen. They're going to come onto the bait, take it. If you can feel it, you'll feel a tick on the rod.
Talk to me about just setting the hook as a principle.
Okay, so first take the rod. This is what it's going to feel like. Can you feel that?
Yep.
That's what it'll feel like when they take it, when
You're talking about worms when they inhale them?
yes. So the worm, let's say it's on the bottom, the fish will vacuum the worm into its mouth because it's pushing water through its gills. It'll vacuum it up, and when that happens, that's when you feel that tick. All right. Now, if you don't feel it, what may happen is that your line just starts to move. If your line is moving toward you and you've had a tight line, reel down, set the hook. If it's moving away, set the hook in the opposite direction. If it's, if it's moving this way, you're gonna set the hook this way. So,
Show me what setting the hook looks like.
okay, setting the hook is going to be, if you felt that, the best thing to do is just do a 2 count, like 1, 2. Because what you don't want to happen is you don't want to set it too quickly. You want to, because typically what they'll do is when they pull it in, they'll get it in their lips at first, and then they'll go ahead and take it into their mouth. So you're giving them enough time to do that. Now, they may spit it out too, but typically it's this and then this. So you're giving them a couple of seconds so that they get it in. Otherwise, you're going to jerk it out of their mouth. Setting the hook is 1, 2, and then just
How violently do you set the hook? What does it look like?
when I've done it, when I watch guys do it, it's something not unlike. These guys will typically get 2 hands on it. Of course, you're using a bait casting reel, not one of these, and they are whipping it. Okay, it's quick. It's not this. It's wham. They are taking it to them. Okay, pretty hard.
And is that true for every one of these lures? You're looking to set the hook with that?
No, I wouldn't think so. A lot of times with the frog, it will be because, again, you gotta let them take the frog. When they take the frog, it's pretty good size. So you gotta let them get it down, but not. It's about that quick. It's 1, 2, bing, you're hitting them. The other thing about terminal tackle is I put another couple of things in here. This is called a shaky head, okay? And it's rigged like this, okay, like the Texas rig, but instead you're screwing it in up here, right? So the head is coming off of it, like so. Okay. Now, when we fished the other day at the pond, I rigged something kind of like this as much as I could with what we had. Guys fish these because they have a different feel than a Texas rig. They don't just sit flat on the bottom like this would with a Texas rig. But what they'll do is they'll hop like this, and the worm will stand up because the worm is floating or suspending in the water, and that's getting the fish's attention as this thing is bouncing along on the bottom. Does that make sense?
It does.
So shaky head can be affected. Now, shaky head is fished in such a way that a lot of guys just drag them, so they're sort of doing this. But then when they stop it for a second, they'll just shake the rod, and what's happening is the whole time they're doing that, this is going on in the water. It's not moving. It's not moving it across anything. It's just staying in the same place, and the bait's moving, and that becomes pretty effective. So shaky head. The only one we didn't talk about, lizards are great. Things with a lot of appendages, so these are typically called lizards, various colors. This is called a brush hog. Again, lots of appendages. These appendages are mostly attached, so you're going to want to pull them apart maybe, or maybe leave them alone, depending upon what the fish want. You got kind of a ring tail with a hook. Of course, that's all designed to give it different motion in the water. And then this is one I just got, and I forget what it's called, but it's crawfish type emulation, and you could fish this just with a weight on it, like a Texas rig.
And how do you hook that?
You're going to hook it in the same way that you hook. What do we have? The worm. You would. This is a little smaller, so you'd use a smaller hook, but it's the same principle in that you're hooking it like that, okay, with the hook obviously protruding or being close to that.
And the advantage of the hook coming up through the body is what?
It makes it weedless, so you're able to push it in or punch it into some cover, be it brush or grass, that sort of thing, without it hanging up. Now it will hang up, but typically you can fish it with a lot of confidence in that sort of thing, versus something, like that with a large exposed hook, which is going to get hung up if you do that.
Now, what's the bait that has caught more fish than any other, invented by some Japanese guy or something?
That would be one of these innocuous stick worms. His is called the Senko, Senko, and then everybody else has made them. I think this one is a Zoom or some other manufacturer, but it's just a straight 6-inch stick worm or whatever. Even Bass Pro makes them. And they come in every color you can think of, some with fleck, just like this one. This is a green pumpkin. Green pumpkin is the most popular color in finesse baits. And then this one has a red fleck in it, so that in clear water that should show up to the fish.
And how do you hook that one, and how do you fish it?
Okay, that's just like we did here. You can use the shaky head or some variation, or you can use the Texas rig that I showed you a moment ago. So that you're using you don't have to use an extra wide gap hook. A lot of guys have gone to more standard hooks. I don't know why, but
And the gap means what? The space between
the gap between here. Other hooks are more like, or standard hooks is the way I call them, are more like one of the barbs on these trebles, where it's more just a straight curve, as opposed to this kind of affair. This is developed specifically for this kind of fishing, so that it'll allow the worm to line up with the line and the hook. All right, specifically for this kind of a rig, Texas rig or Carolina rig or whatever. So the main thing that you're going to need to do is know that this is called a plastic worm, and then a lot of times you hear this referred to as finesse baits. And finesse baits has to do with finesse fishing. Finesse fishing is where, instead of more of an active type presentation like this, it's going to be that very slow, somewhat slower in a different location, usually on the bottom, okay? There are guys that swim worms and catch fish. I don't know how they do it, but they do. And so there's just another way. I'll tell you this, you can look at a wacky rig. Very effective, very effective. In that case, it's more of a straight shanked hook. It's a different kind of hook, but it'll be hooked through this egg sac portion of the worm here, flat, and they'll hook it more like that. Now, I first heard of this, I said, that's the dumbest thing I've ever seen. And then I saw it in a pool. And when you pull it, I'll get it. When you pull it, it causes this thing to go through the water like it's this. Another kind of worm, this is called a trick worm. This is just another variation on the theme. And then I did bring in a wacky rig. Okay, so this is a trick worm. Don't get hung up on the names. This is called a mosquito hook. And see how different it is from the other ones. But it's just hooked. I happen to have a keeper on here, but you don't need that. So it's just a smaller hook, okay? And when it comes to the water, it's crazy good. It's got that, it's amazing to watch it. To look at it, you think this is crazy, but man, when you see it in motion, it's dynamite. So I'll just keep that on there. The last thing we didn't talk about was jigs, and this is called a punching jig. Don't get all hung up on that. There are different kinds of heads for different types of situations. But this one is without any kind of trailer on it. Okay, it's just bare hook. But what's going on is typically you'll see them and we'll put a trailer on it, and this emulates crawfish, all right? And jigs just do that. That's their function. This is black and blue because our water is so murky. It's easier for the fish to find, but on cloudy days, they're good. But typically, this green pumpkin is a better color by and large. And so I put a different kind of trailer on it, but it's got that motion. All right. So again, as it lays on the bottom and you've got current or whatever, it's working those appendages. And it's like the worm. You're going to feel it and set the hook or see the line move. All right.
Okay, so talk me through the cast, the pull, the whole deal with the jig.
Okay, so it's just like what you're doing. I mean, you're just going to tie it on, and then you'll try to flip it beside some kind of cover, that sort of thing. Whether it's grass or it's some kind of wood cover, if you got to lay down, particularly that kind of thing. If they're spawning and they're on beds, you're going to hop it over that to get a reaction bite. Not unlike what we talked about with this sort of thing, but it's in a smaller form, and it's just got a lot of action with this skirt and with this trailer on it. But it's that pitch or throw into an area, and then just that hopping it back motion, all right, like that. But again, as with these other finesse baits, when you do that, you're constantly reeling down to make sure your line is tight. All right, you don't want it to ever be slack. So you're gonna throw it, let it settle to the bottom. Okay. The thing about, here's another thing that you need to remember. When you're fishing this type of bottom bait, you're going to throw it out there and feed off a little line. That way, when it goes to the bottom, it falls straight. If your line is tight when it hits the water, it will pendulum back to you. So you just lost some of your fishing area. So you're going to throw it out there, feed off some line. So it's a super slack line when it hits the water, so that it will fall more or less straight down. All right. If it's tight, then it's just going to be penduluming back to you. You don't want that, if that makes sense. So be sure to do that. But once it's out there, again, it's just that hopping, reel down, hopping, reel down, moving a little bit, moving it a lot. And you have to remember that this kind of swing might move it 5 feet. That's a lot. So you don't need a lot. It's more of a ticking back to you, and then taking up the slack, maybe letting it sit, and like so forth and so on. But when you get to where you can feel a fish, it's a lot of fun, because it's all about the feel at that point. You can't really see them, but that's where the bigger fish are. Is they're down there in cover. They're down the bottom, that sort of thing. So yeah, that's what you got. Questions?
I don't think I have any questions, but I'm sure I will once we start fishing.
That's good. And the good news is you know what the baits are called. Just dial them up on YouTube. There's 1 million videos. For each one, there's always a segment on best baits for whatever month you're fishing in or season. And there's always a top 3 or top 5 baits that they're always talking about. Take a look at those. I mean, take a look at how the pros are fishing a particular lure, that sort of thing, or not fishing it. Sometimes we'll fish something and fish it wrong. That's how I've discovered that I was fishing some of these the wrong way. And like this one, I used to just straight retrieve that one back to the boat. Never caught anything on it. But I think if it's fished in, the right situation, maybe shallow 5 to 6 feet of water and bumping it along, you could do some good with it. You just got to be careful with it because of the exposed hook. So, as with all these, and that's the biggest part of it is getting the cast accuracy down. I don't have it down. I'm working on it, but if you can get your cast accuracy down, you can really do a lot of good. So anyway,
Thanks, Ron.
you're welcome. Have fun with it.